Hello, and again, thank you for being here. It's a real pleasure for me to be chatting to David, who I realize I've known for quite a few years at this point and regard as a friend as well as a colleague, which might account for why I feel more relaxed than usual about the prospect of chatting to David, because it feels less like an interview than a chat. And I hope it might feel that way for him too, although he looks anxious. Relax, David. Pretend these people are not here. I first encountered David as a student at a seminar, I believe, but I later had the pleasure of supervising his dissertation, which took the form of a collection of short stories. Really, I am of course prejudiced in David's favor, but I say this without prejudice, really beautiful pieces. What's happened to those stories, incidentally?
That's a great question, Dan. We will hopefully see them one day out in the world. Who knows? Yeah.
I do hope so. In my recollection, each of those pieces, one way or another, dealt with people who, through their class or their circumstances, were kind of over the edge, a little bit outside the central zone, if I can put it that way. And they were all depicted with great tenderness. It felt as if you had strong feeling for these people who were junkies or thieves or just people down on their luck and trying to get by. I mean, I wonder if we could just start with a general response to that. Would you say those are the sorts of figures you relate to, fiction-wise?
Yes, 100%. Thank you so much for that introduction. I absolutely kind of underdogs, outsiders are the characters I tend to focus on and love the most when I write.
I happen to know that some of the writers you like to read are the kinds of writers who specialize in underdogs and outsiders too, but we might come back to that in a moment. Your first novel, Like It Matters, I know was kind of unfolded from one of those short stories, if I can put it that way. And it dealt with a character called Ed, I think, and his kind of semi-doomed relationship with a girl called Charlotte. It involved drugs and crime and ultimately murder, and yet at the same time one felt with Ed that he was a good guy who had not planned on things working out that way. Again, the kind of tenderness for an outsider figure that is not always that common in South African fiction. I mean, is that the way you feel about Ed too?
Yes. 100%. Yes, I remember at the first launch, you sort of asked me why this character, and there was just something, yes, kind of endearing about his outlook and attitude that, as you mentioned, I sort of had mined from a previous story, and it was just a voice that I wanted to spend more time with, I think.
Well, it seems relevant because this is your second novel, Hell of a Country. And again, it's dealing with people who are very much over the edge, but they are a whole lot further over the edge and down than any characters you've dealt with before. It's based on a real South African murder case from the early 1970s, 1974, I believe, which was known at the time sensationally as the Scissors murder trial. For those people, because there must be some here who don't know anything about it, would you like to just sketch out the circumstances?
Yes, for sure. So the real Scissors murder involved a young lady named Marlene Lenberg, who was obsessed with her boss and lover. His name was Christian van der Linde in real life, and after multiple attempts at forcing an end to his marriage, in her favor so that she could be married, she, in the end, desperately enlisted coloured amputee named Martinez Kuchu to kind of do the dirty work. So that is very much the sort of the mechanics of the original case are very much reproduced in Halliday country, but I'm sure we'll get onto this. It is still a novel that is trying to do more than simply just retell the crime.
Well, would you like to say something about that? When you say you're trying to do more, what is the more?
So there was something, I'd actually not heard of the story before, and then it sort of it came my way at a time when I was casting about for an idea that would maybe allow me to write a little bit more directly about South Africa and its history. But maybe through the lens of a sort of pacey story that I thought I could maybe sort of render in quite an exciting way. So essentially, I just thought that the power dynamics embedded in that crime are just so redolent of the Forster years and the kind of both gender and racial power dynamics that were sort of playing out more generally in society. At the time, the way the Scissors murder was covered in the press, it was just this, it sort of scandalized the country, and it was treated very sensationally in the reporting without a lot of introspection, without a lot of sense of, well, what can this crime tell us about our society? It was sort of held at arm's length, and sort of, all people involved were demonized to one degree or another. So it just felt like maybe time to go back and take another look at it.
Okay, the Scissors murder actually happened in 1974, correct? And I think I'm correct in saying you were not born in 1974.
No.
So how is it that you came across this particular story and seized on it in this way?
Daniela, my partner, who you know well, she wanted to do a stage monologue in which she cut her hair live in front of an audience. And so I said, well, and she was like, write me a monologue where this makes sense. And so I said, well, go look for maybe true crime, maybe like a true murder story where someone would compellingly need to change their appearance in a hurry. And bless her, she uncovered this story, showed it to me, and I just immediately knew. Like I said, I was kind of looking around for an idea for a novel, and the instant I saw the story, I was just like, ooh, I can do something with that power triangle that sits at the heart of the story. I know that can sustain a novel, and it was exactly sort of thematically the kind of thing I was looking to get my teeth into. So it really did come to me, and it began life as a stage monologue, which was interesting.
Yeah, maybe we could chat a bit about crime writing, because I mean, this is a bit tangential, but only a bit. I think the general agreement amongst publishers and writers is that the one genre that's shrinking is literary fiction, but genres like crime fiction are in fact booming. But I just wonder how you see the tradition of crime writing. I quite recently, just by accident, picked up a book in Clark's bookshop, which was called Classic Crimes, and it was by someone called William Ruffhead. And it was the first time I'd really given any thought to the matter, but these were very early written pieces that were coverage of trials, sensational trials, often murder trials in Scotland. And it's the first time it occurred to me, before Netflix and TV and podcasts and so on, that was the way stories were captured, vividly, through sensational accounts or accounts of sensational events. These accounts happen to be extremely well written. And then I sort of thought a bit sideways and thought you could actually classify. I mean, it seems inevitable to me that if crime fiction is booming and literary fiction is shrinking, that somebody with the right gifts is going to write a piece of literary fiction that is a crime novel. And then I thought, well, maybe Dostoevsky's done that with Crime and Punishment. Or you could argue Truman Capote with In Cold Blood. So I just wonder about that sort of continuum. Is it? I know you share my lurid obsession with true crime, but that's more of a kind of a Netflix obsession. So in a literary sense, is this something that interests you? Do you see yourself as part of a tradition? And if so, is it in a Dostoevskian sense of, giving metaphysics to these events, or is it political? You seem to have gestured in a political direction.
No. I mean, what a fantastic question. I hope I can do it justice with the response. So for me, crime writing, very interesting. Like there's something about, if we just talk about its sort of generic components, its features now. Like, okay, so normally very pacey narratives, which I happen to like, and then two other features that I think are sort of, that I was conscious of trying to use for my purposes in the book are, this question of what kind of people do these kind of things. And I think there's a lot of space there for metaphysical, psychological exploration. It's quite a thing starting out on a project where that your protagonists or your characters are either going to commit or suffer a violent crime. It's quite an interesting headspace to inhabit through the creation of a book, for sure. The other thing I love about crime writing is that it connects areas of society, people across class barriers that would maybe otherwise not sort of come into contact with one another. So I think in a society like South Africa, and particularly in 70s South Africa, where people lived such siloed existences, what an interesting environment for them to almost come into contact with one another. For me, yes, Dostoevsky, I mean, it is so much more than crime writing, but it is crime writing. Dennis Johnson, my hero, something like Angels, it has a lot of crime writing in it, whether it's just the sort of, looking at the sort of slightly seedier parts of society. Edward Bunker, something like No Beast So Fierce. There's something, also quite like demotic about the voice of crime fiction, quite hard-bitten, that appeals to me. So there are a lot of generic features about crime writing that I think actually give themselves quite well to something maybe a little bit more literary, a more literary project.
That's a nice full answer. How closely did you stick to the original facts? I mean, you've called it a creative
reimagining.
Reimagining, yeah. So what does that mean exactly?
That's a very good question. No, the mechanics of the crime are very recognizably, the crime. There's no ways I could say that the actual events didn't fundamentally inspire what happens in the book, for sure. However, I did take quite a lot of liberties, and there was a lot of creative work involved. For one thing, I'd say the main change is just the timeline is radically condensed in the book. The events played out over 3 or 4 years, as it was in reality. It's an already very bleak story. I feel like the longer the time frame, it was more bleak and more unedifying. I think that it worked better as a piece of fiction for it to be a condensed timeline where there's a sense of people losing control. There's a bit of a fugue sort of state, maybe that gathers momentum as the book progresses. So there was that. The other thing is that, again, the coverage of the crime at the time was very, it was kind of, scandalous, and it was very sort of superficial. I did find some slightly deeper studies. There was a brilliant master's thesis written about South African female killers in the 1980s that I managed to find that really helped the research. Gave us slightly more dimensions to Marlene, who I call Lorraine in the book. But there was just a stage where, so over and above the sort of the timeline thing, where I just realized that in order to write these characters, I had to make them my own, and so really, personal details are adapted. Her family, for example, Lorraine is much smaller than Marlene's was in reality. Just lots of small personal details that I felt I had to change to be able to understand the characters and write them like I needed to write them.
The voice of the book, you opted this time for a third-person narrative. Like It Matters, and a lot of the short stories were very grounded in particular voices, which is clearly a strength of yours. Why or how did you arrive at this particular approach, the third-person voice for this?
Yeah, so the first version of this book, the first draft, was entirely told from Lorraine's point of view, not in the first person, still in the third person, but it just stuck very close to her point of view. And I mean, I didn't like that version of the book. I felt like it wasn't just half the story, it was, a quarter of the story or whatever. It was leaving so much out. And to sort of create the effect that I was going for, which was more a story about the time, the climate, the sort of psychological environment, it seemed to work to play these voices off against each other, so that you hear, particularly in the opening sections of the book, there's a kind of cross-cutting technique where we're with Lorraine and then we're with Alfie, who's the sort of her mirror opposite, where she is powerful. Well, her relationship with him, he's powerless. Where she is, her family is moved from the flats into a suburb. He is, violently he suffers the forced removals of District 6. So it felt like I needed these voices to sort of speak to each other to create the whole. And I'm just so grateful to my publisher who allowed me to dispense with the inverted commas. So I'm hoping the effect, action, dialogue, thoughts, they sort of, hopefully the effect of the book is that they all exist in sort of one continuum. And so that, the stuff, the political stuff of the exterior is very clearly bleeding into the interior and vice versa.
Well, I'd like to probe that a little bit. Why is that so important to you? I know from earlier drafts of the book, I think you used quotes and a lot of statistical material, and it seemed that it seemed important to you that this wasn't just a crime story, that its racial content reflected something larger about the country. I mean, is that accurate? And why do you insist on framing it in that way?
Yeah, I think so. The overall sort of idea is just that maybe things like desire is something, one of another sort of mini theme of the book. So things like desires, attitudes, our expectations are maybe more material than we like to think. I think it's natural for us to feel that we are captain of the ship. We are our rationality or our reason sort of kind of transcends and steers us around these forces that don't really impact us. But I'd like to maybe suggest that particularly in an environment that is so politicized, that these things become deeply impacted and affected by the climate in which we live. And while someone like Alfie, who is obviously on the sort of sharp end of oppression, of course it's way worse for someone in that position. It is still debasing for the powerful what Lorraine feels entitled to do in order to satisfy her desires is, I would argue, sort of debasing too, of course.
You're a musician some of the time, so I'm wondering, this is a bit of a latitudinal question, but I'm wondering how much your musical background feeds into the creation of style. I mean, it was very distinctive, although the voice of Like It Matters was a first-person voice, Ed's voice, that it had a music, if you like, that felt distinctly South African, and I could make the same case for the voice of this particular book. So I'm just wondering, if you have any observations about that.
Yes, I mean, that's, I really do believe in that, is it Walter Pater, that all art constantly aspires to the condition of music. I really do think that my favorite books are ones that work on a sonic level as well as plot, as well as theme, as well as etc. Like my favorite writing is mellifluous. It's lovely to listen to, as well as interesting to read. So I think it's just trying to recreate that as much as possible. Harder to do in third person for sure. Not as maybe this one isn't as kind of obviously lyrical, but hopefully there are certain passages here and there that do the job.
Who are some of those writers that you were mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm obsessed with Dennis Johnson. I really am. For every book I read, I go and then read another. I reread a Dennis Johnson book, that kind of thing. So really him, maybe first and foremost. I mean, I still read Shakespeare a lot, which I mean shouldn't be so surprising or whatever. But you know, I do. Strangely, I mean, I find that there is a musicality, though, even to Chekhov, who I'm reading in translation. So it's not, it's strange. There are different kinds of musics, and to find. Eudora Welty is another wonderful stylist. Your writing has got a very musical quality. It's much. I admire it. It's sort of, yeah, it's kind of like masculine, sparse music, but it's, you know, but. Yeah.
This is more of a sort of mechanical question, I guess, but I'm intrigued. Given that these events took place in the 1970s and you were so concerned about recreating the South African society that propped them up, if you like, how did you research it? Because it's very clear the details that you're including, I recall from my childhood, but my childhood preceded yours, and those details may have changed by the time you reached the age at which I noticed them. So how did you go about that?
Yeah, kind of two levels. Like there's the sort of the very almost sort of prosaic practical level, like, you know, looking at reports from the time, court proceedings, you know, the sort of the very much like what happened when and what the process of deciding what I was going to use of that, what I was going to maybe leave out or adapt. But then, you know, really I'd say almost the more useful side of it was looking at creative responses from the era. So either literature like Richard Reeve or Alex Laguma was a huge source of inspiration for this, A Walk in the Night particularly, which is a bit earlier, but I mean, you know, sort of close enough to really help me visualize the era. And then, do you know, the other very useful thing I did is that I compiled, I mean, I must have 500 photographs from the early 1970s Cape Town that I meticulously sort of ordered, and I still have stored on my computer somewhere. And a lot of scenes I would start with photograph and sort of write out of those details. I discovered Billy Monk's photographs for the first time in my life during the course of this book, which is what a pleasure that was. There's you know, obviously that nightclub scene is basically like me stitching together a bunch of Billy Monk photographs into what hopefully is a bit of a cinematic kind of scene.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I did pick up the Billy Monk reference, but not everyone necessarily would know about his photos. I mean, there is a very South African aesthetic that runs through your work. You and I were chatting yesterday, and there was some other anecdote, a South African anecdote that came up, and you made the comment to the effect that, well, it's a weird story, but it's not more weird than other South African stories, and no South African story has first claim to weirdness. So, given the weird events of this book, I mean, this is okay, this is a question you may not be able to answer, but were you drawn to this because the weirdness is an anomaly? In other words, these are atypical events. Or were you drawn to it because you think these events are in some way emblematic of South Africa?
I mean, what a fantastic question. That word emblematic. I've been trying to find like the right word to describe what I thought this story would gesture towards, and that is also the one that I lighted upon.
Feel free to use
it. Yeah, no, thank you. So yes, 100%. You know, one doesn't want to say it could only have happened in 1970s South Africa, because there are many unequal societies where people might be sort of forced into these desperate sort of relations with one another. But yes, it did feel very redolent or emblematic of the time, for sure. And again, you know, the way it was covered at the time was very much like who are these? You know, like this is not our savor, South Africa. But I would suggest, like, no, maybe actually this is the kind of thing that festers and boils up in such a society. Yeah.
Okay, a final question from me, I guess. You've in fact, it seems, I mean, it may not be a dedication in your mind, but it comes across as a dedication in front of the book. You've said in memoriam, and you've named the various people involved in these events, only one of whom was murdered, but you've extended the same salutation, if you like, towards the other people involved. And there is a tenderness of tone that runs through this book, even through these very extreme events, towards these people. I also noticed that the way you've ended the book, I know it falls short time-wise of the actual ends of these various people, but you chose to end the book in a way that was not as savage as real life turned out to be. We know that Marlene Lenberg ultimately killed herself after being released from prison, and Martinus Chuchu was killed in a traffic accident, but you've chosen to end the book at a kindlier moment. And I wonder about this tenderness that you're extending to them. In fact, that dedication, if that's what it is, seems a kind of absolution that you're giving all of them in advance, as if these are terrible events, but somehow, I don't know another way to put it, there's quite a Buddhist approach to it, in that even the people who perpetrate terrible acts are sufferers in some way. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, you ask such fantastic questions, Damon. Yes. Yes. So, okay, first thing I'll say is that, you know, I've never done a project like this before, and I never thought, frankly, I never thought I would. You know, I mean, I've written quite a lot of different things, plays, films, short stories, of course, and have never really worked so closely from real life. So the dedication also was maybe a way to absolve myself from the discomfort of writing, in a sense, other people's stories. And the dedication ends with each of whom has their own version of the story, which I think is fair. You know, not knowing how any of them sort of felt ultimately about their role and everything. So I think that's part of it. And then the other part of it is, yes, you know, the great challenge setting off for me once I realized, once I'd really committed to, this is the project, was sticking with characters that would both perpetrate and suffer violence, and in a way that made me feel okay, made me feel sort of, like I didn't want to be closed off to them over the course of the creative process. And also just, you once said something on stage where I remember it, I'll never forget it, that as much as you work on a book needs to work on you, or otherwise what's the point? You know, how are you going to sustain yourself over a few years? And I took it as an opportunity to try and understand, how do you commit a murder? How do you do this? And that led me into like a whole thing about sort of investigating shame and the centrality of shame to at least some kind of violent acts, which is something that I play with quite a lot in the book, and I think is maybe also a cause or a reason for the tenderness, just because that's yes, these people have. They're nasty to each other, but they're also suffering themselves from a sense of a lack of self-concept and other things.
I wonder if you'd give us a little reading as a flavour of the voice that you've created.
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you. I'll pick a sort of shorter section toward the end of the first chapter. The book is structured, it goes like September, October, November, December, and then after. So this is just at the end of the first part. It's a flashback, so no spoilers. And it was my attempt to just sketch very quickly the kind of very early life that Lorraine might have experienced and set herself up for this sort of desperate sense in that she craves affirmation from, like she needs to be sort of remade in André's eyes constantly throughout the book. So, where does that sort of come from? And this is my suggestion. The end of September, but years before. A house stands on a salty stretch of earth on the dry side of Table Mountain and in the teeth of the wind, which is relentless here, cold, dispiriting. In just over a decade, the house, the land, all the rusted stuff lying on it will be purchased by the government at an unbelievable price in one of thousands of similar transactions. There is no car around, though one does live here. See the tire marks in the sand, the evidence of an oil leak on a patch of grass under a grey tree. Approach the house using 3 cracked concrete steps. Hear the sheets of tarpaulin on the roof flapping like trapped birds, unidentifiable creaks, cracks in windows and doors whistling as the wind whips through. The door is closed, but there's no lock for it. Go inside. In the kitchen, a gas burner stands on a milk crate. A small table is covered by a stiff grey gingham cloth. The rooms are small and darker than they need to be. Many windows have been broken and patched with cardboard. There's basic furniture, stubborn grime, some heirlooms displayed with the obstinate pride of the never thought we'd be so poor. There's a pervasive smell of wood smoke. The bathroom is dim and empty. The bedroom has 2 single beds. Both are starchily made and unpeopled. There is another room that seems empty too, but for a faint croaking sound. In a small cot by the window, Lorraine, 9 months old, awake the last hour, has strained her throat, crying out for nobody. Yet she needs.
Thank you. This is probably a good moment to throw this open to questions from the floor, because I'm sure there are people who'd like to ask David stuff.
Oh, we've got a roving microphone. Look at that.
Hi. I haven't read the book. This conversation helped. But I do know that I've come from an era at the tender age of 22 when the action of your book takes place. And I find myself, and I don't know whether this has been unfair to me or to you, but I was, in my sort of student politics days, completely taken aback at how alien white people were to people of different race and colour. I remember someone saying to me, excuse the expression, fuck off whitey, And I come all the way to meet you, it sort of helped, you know, it was, and so looking back all to 1974 through the lens, I don't know when you were born, but through the lens that is almost inconceivable that you can reimagine the separation of people, I find the most interesting part of this discussion. Because for me it would be almost impossible, and I'm not sure why, but it's generated that thought through the discussion. So I don't know if there's even a comment you can make, but it places a spotlight on something in the book I can't grasp from the interview.
Very interesting. And I mean, I'll leave it to readers to decide whether I've been successful in that or not. What I will say is that I think that the voice of the book is what I tried to do was make it kind of like very keenly observant of the time, but also not entirely of the time. I think there remains something quite modern about the voice in that there is a gap between the events and the sort of interpretation or the attitude that the voice is sort of expressing sometimes. So I do think that in that, I think there's maybe something honest about that, about leaving that gap, and that there is this sense of we're looking at this from now, even if in the descriptions, hopefully it is very evocative. Great to see you again, though, John. Yeah.
And it should be said, I guess, that clearly these events took place. So,
yes.
Even given the alienation of the times, there were these connections. And the circumstances probably made it possible, right? Because he came in as an amputee,
yes,
and she was working at the hospital where these prosthetics were being made. So those are the circumstances that set up the meeting, because otherwise it probably would not have taken place across those racial or class lines. Yeah.
Thank you, Damon. That's right. I should have said.
Can you tell us about the title?
Yes, I wanted to ask you about titles. Great title.
Thank you. Yeah, so the title is actually a line of dialogue that's kind of spoken unironically by a group of white sort of surgeons and doctors, giving a toast at a table, like hell of a country, kind of thing. So it's meant to be obviously ambivalent and ironic, so that it's really meant to point at the disparity. If you're on one side of it, you can maybe think of it like that, but obviously if you're on Alfie's side of it, it is more like a literal hell of a country. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
Thanks, David. I'm really looking forward to reading this. I'm just wondering, because is there a script in the future for this? Because I know you're a screenwriter, and this seems a very movieable type movie.
I would love that. I would absolutely love to adapt it. Some of the writing might even seem a little bit begging to be adapted. It's hopefully very cinematic the way it's written. So that would be definitely part of the plan. Yeah.
Thank you. Really enjoyed the discussion. I just wanted to ask about writing a story about real events and real people, or inspired by real events and real people. Did you get in contact with the families of these people? Is there sort of a process that you went through, or did you decide not to? Kind of imagine that in the beginning it would have been kind of a tricky conversation to have.
No, I didn't. I think part of the reason for that is that just I did want it to be sort of a novel from the get-go, and I thought that might set up weird expectations if I was like recruiting them into helping me write something that then I was then going to depart from. So no, but I did try and find. It was like something, for example, that I found very helpful was an interview that her brother, Marlene Lenberg's brother, gave to Huisgenoot in the 80s. And so I did try and find sort of, where they were able to speak in their own words. And in the court proceedings, there was some of that, as much as possible. But yes, as I said earlier, it became, I think, quite clear to me early on that if I was going to do what I wanted to with this book, I needed to make the characters my own. And so a sense of educated myself enough about the facts of the case, but then let the sort of rules of fiction dictate maybe more than the historical accuracy at a certain point. Yeah. Still feel a bit conflicted about it. I mean, to be honest, it's not something that I, like I said, it's not something that I ever planned to do. But yes, this project got its teeth into me, and I needed to get it finished.
Okay. If that's the last question, then gosh, thank you very, very much, guys, for